Hey there everyone, it's Nina. Thanks for joining me today. I'm going to be creating a watercolor project with you using products from Simon Says Stamp's new Dream Big collection. But before I jump into that project, I did want to tell you that there is a blog hop going on right now for that Dream Big release, which means you're going to find a lot of inspiration using the new products from this release. And if you want to head on over to my blog, if you're not there already, if you go down to the bottom of the post, I have links to the blog hop along with more information about the gift with purchase and even a chance to win some prizes. So for today's project, I'm going to be doing some no-line watercoloring using the Magnolia Apple Blossoms stamp and die set. I loved this floral image and it was just begging to be watercolored, so I pulled it out, and it's a pretty large image, but it does fit inside of the mini Misty. There are some other smaller elements that you can use too. I'm just going to be using the main flower. I've mounted this stamp onto my Misty, and I have some watercolor paper in here. We're going to stamp with antique linen distress ink. And if you've watched any of my no-line watercoloring videos before, you know that the reason I've chosen this ink is because it will react with the water and the lines will start to disappear. It works really well for the no-line watercoloring technique. I'm using watercolors that I have in my stash. These are a mix of Daniel Smith and Winsor and Newton watercolors, but don't feel like you have to use these particular watercolors. You can use anything that you have. I'm just basically coloring each individual petal that you're seeing me do right now in the exact same way across this whole flower. So as you can see, I start with the lightest purple that I'm using from my two shades that I've picked. And then I'm starting to gradually bring in the darker purple and work it from the innermost portion of each petal towards the outer areas. And I'm trying to maintain some of that lightest purple that we had put down first, because that's going to allow me to get that lighter versus darker areas on these petals and gives them more dimension. If you feel like you didn't get enough contrast when you went ahead and watercolored your petals the first time, you can always go back after they're dry and add more layers, which I did in a couple of spots. I also colored the green leaves all the same throughout this project. So I started with a lighter wash of green, and then I brought in more concentrated green and added some shading. Then throughout all of the smaller flowers in this image, I used a combination of purple, pink, and also more of a reddish pink. And I just used different versions of those three colors across each petal so that each petal was different and allowed this flower image to have a little bit more interest rather than everything all being the exact same color. And when I'm watercoloring, I'm not using a super wet brush. I wanted to make sure I didn't water down the colors too much. What I actually did was when I needed some lighter washes, I actually mixed those off to the side inside of my watercolor palette. So if you look on the bottom left, you can see there's a wash next to that nice intense purple color, and that's where I would mix those and then go ahead and just pick up from there. So I get that nice wash, but I'm not adding too much water to the paper. I'm wrapping things up by adding just some extra shading with that green. I brought in splatters using some of the same colors that we used throughout the image. And then I finally brought in some white gouache, and I'm going to mix that with a bit of water so that I can splatter that onto my card as well. I did cut this down with the coordinating die. You can see how I cut that off of the corner of the card. I do have foam tape on the back side of this too. But I want to do some stenciling before I actually attach this down onto my A2 size card. I'm using Simon Says Stamp's new very, very low tack tape. I have to tell you, this tape is so good. I love this tape for everything, including ink blending, watercoloring, die cutting, stenciling, and it just is such a nice, gentle adhesive, but it does hold everything really well too. So I have tape here that's holding down this stencil. This is the tin tile stencil from Simon Says Stamp, and as you can see, it's holding this really, really well. I used a couple of different ink colors. I've got Peony and also Iris, and I blended these together to create a custom mix of these two colors. I was trying to really bring in that color that was in the flowers of this particular image, and I really liked how this turned out. I did soften that white card base by just bringing a bit of that pink and purple over top of the ink blending, and I left a highlight in the middle section of the card down towards the bottom right, and that's going to be where we're going to add our sentiment. I I thought I would continue that splatter onto our card base, so I'm using some shimmer mist and I'm just sprinkling that across the card. This is subtle, but it will catch the light and it'll add just a little bit of sparkly interest here and there. I removed the release paper on the back side of the foam tape, and I'm just going to push my flower right on top of the card, and we're going to move on to creating our sentiment. Inside of the Magnolia Apple Blossoms stamp set, there's some great greetings. I picked one of them and I'm stamping it with embossing ink onto Simon's white glossy cardstock. I love embossing sentiments on this white glossy cardstock. It just looks so pretty and it adds some really nice shine to the paper, which accents the shine of the sentiment. And then I'll just fussy cut this sentiment out because there are no coordinating dies. If you don't want a fussy cut, you could trim this down into a simple banner shape. But I did like the look of the fussy cutting with the image here, so that's why I went through the trouble of doing so. I used foam tape to also attach that sentiment, and we're almost done. But I did want to add a few embellishments, and I pulled out the new Coral Burst sequin mix. This worked perfectly for this card because there's a lot of pinks and warm golden colors that matched really nicely with the colors in this card. So I'm just going to scatter a few of these on top of the flower and also around it. And that just adds a nice bit of sparkle to the finished project. And that is how I created this no-line watercolor card. So I hope that watching how I colored this flower and explaining how I did this petal by petal, and I repeated the same process across each petal, everything's the exact same method. All I did was swap the colors around. I used just a limited color palette, and that allowed me to create this really cool dimensional flower. But I hope that you got to see how I broke it down, and hopefully you will try this out for yourself. Now, if no-line watercoloring does intimidate you, you could totally go ahead and stamp this with a black ink so that you can see the lines a bit more. If you don't want to go the no-line watercolor route, this card would look amazing with black lines too. So don't be afraid to change things up a little bit. I hope you were inspired. I hope you get to try this technique out. And don't forget to stop by my blog for more information on the blog hop, because there's a lot of great ideas to be seen for today's hop, showcasing the Simon Says Stamp Dream Big collection. Thanks so much for watching. I'll be back soon with more to share. But until I see you again, I hope you all have a fabulous day. Bye!